How's it going, and welcome to No Fun Alloved's guide series on Curse of Strahd, a 5th edition module. In today's video, we will be taking a look at the Old Bonegrinder, a place where something wicked this way comes. But before I go into anything major, I must warn you that there will be spoilers, so players that plan on playing in this module, do not watch this. But DMs that want added insights on how we can flavor this up, let's stick around because we have a lot to go over. So here we are, Chapter 6. Once again, the chapters don't make any sense in regards of when you would approach them at all. They don't have any semblance of the level or anything. They're just kind of all over the place, but that's okay. As long as you're willing to thumb through it, you can certainly find what you're looking for. So, in Chapter 6, the Old Bonegrinder, here we have just that. We have this windmill, which has been converted by the Coven of Hags into a pastry-making machine. And how do they make these pastries? By getting kids and grinding them up. There are 3 women that inhabit this dwelling. There is Morgantha, the leader of the Coven, and her 2 wretched daughters, Bella Sunbane and Ophelia Wormwinkle. So, already off the bat, awesome names, but I'm going to tell you right now, if you let any of these names slip, then your players are automatically going to know that they're hags. Even if they are new to D&D, they're obviously going to know something's up if you call someone Sunbane and Wormwiggle. So definitely something to consider if you are revealing their name. Now, why are these hags taking these kids and grinding them into a pie and selling them back to people? It's purely because they want to just sow nastiness all around Strahd's domain. The interesting thing about these hags is that they don't go around snatching kids left, right, and center. No, they in fact do not steal any kids. They will only ever take kids if the parents sell them. And that adds to the deep nastiness that resides all in this module. The fact that some people are willing to do anything it takes to just get a moment of, respite in this land. That they're willing to sell their kids to never be seen again. Now, these characters can be interacted with very early on in the campaign. If you're running it more as written, then this is in fact one of the second locations your players ever arrive to. The first being the village of Barovia, and then the second being this along the roads. And if you have more noble people and they begin to find out what's going on here, they're probably going to strike. But unfortunately to them, that's not going to end up well because, quite frankly, Night Hags themselves are incredibly powerful. But if the Coven is complete, if all 3 women are nearby, their spellcasting gets uplifted and they can destroy low-level parties. A level 3 party would probably have a pretty tough time dealing with just one Night Hag, as they have a pretty high AC, they have 112 hit points, they have resistance to a lot of damage that is not magical, and it's more than likely a lot of people are not going to have magical items at this point. So it just is a nightmare. And these creatures can also be attacking for a decent amount of damage. They deal 2d8 plus 4 points of damage on average. That's a lot. And they got some spells which are extremely effective against low-level parties. Magic Missile, guaranteed damage. If there's someone that is weak and the hag wants them down, Magic Missile them, easy as that, free damage. And very big is the Sleep spell. Sleep will, on average, knock someone out if they are levels 1, 2, and 3 on an average roll here. And especially so if they've already taken damage. In fact, if the hag spreads her damage out, she can potentially sleep all of them, in which case she'll just go ahead and start killing them one by one. Really terrifying stuff. And lastly here, if the Coven is complete, look at their amazing spell list. They've got such things as Counterspell to stop any spell casting, Lightning Bolt to just outright down people, Polymorphing people, Eye-biting people. These are incredibly powerful spells, and levels 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 will not be able to destroy a Coven if they are extremely effective. But what is nice is we do get some information on what happens if the Coven is broken. What happens if your players get the jump on one of these Night Hags and kills them? Well, Morgantha is going to do what Night Hags normally do. She's going to go ahead and take a kid, eat them, and then eventually give birth to another and reform the Coven. Of course, thankfully, this will probably be outside of the scope of the adventure, unless you're running a very, very long time-skipping adventure where a lot of years take place. We also get some really cool information that Morgantha gave her Coven's Haggai to Cyrus Bellevue. Who is Cyrus Bellevue? Well, he is a manservant that works in the Castle Ravenloft, in the larder in fact. And the reason for this is because Morgantha wants to just keep an eye on good old Strahd and make sure that they don't get on Strahd's bad side. Now, I talked a little bit about the dream pastries. What exactly are they? Well, they're as simple as this. When you bite into these nice little mincemeat pies, you must make a DC 16 Constitution saving throw or fall into a trance which lasts 1d4 plus 4 hours. During that time, you are incapacitated, have a speed of 0 of course, and the trance will end if you take any amount of damage or if you're shaken awake. While in this trance, you get these beautiful dreams, these joyous dreams, and you are no longer in the lands of Barovia. But unfortunately, once this ends, then reality begins to set in, and the dream ends, and you are back in this terrible world, and you're probably wanting to go back to that land. And that is why people are selling their kids. People, in the land have nothing better to do than have kids, so, if a dwelling has a whopping 7 kids, then they might be willing to sell a kid, and get some of these pies, because these pies are the only thing worth living for. And the only other thing worth living for in this land is wine. And depending on how you play out that whole situation at the Wizard of Wine's winery, wine might be running out. The thing is, though, is while wine might be running out throughout the entirety of the lands of Barovia, these pies will continue to be made unless your players deal with this coven. What's really interesting, too, is when your players arrive to the windmill, it's noted that there is a raven that is seemingly trying to warn the party about the location. The raven, of course, can't talk, so unless anybody in the party has the ability to communicate with animals, the only thing that they'll really glean is with a DC 12 insight check that the raven is basically trying to warn them off. But if you don't have people that are perceptive enough in this, and you don't have people that can try and talk to the raven, then your players are probably going to be unawares about what's going on here. In addition to that, your players will also see that ravens are circling above stones, which are located right behind the windmill, and these are megaliths. For areas of the windmill, we don't have much to look at really, because of course there's only the 4 little locations. So let's start diving into those. Area 1, we have the ground floor. As your players walk in, they'll be able to see basically a makeshift kitchen, and the place is dirty and smelly, and if they look around hard enough, they will actually be able to find small human bones that litter the flagstone floor. Located in the kitchen as well, we have a barrel which holds this greenish-black demonic ichor. This thing smells nasty, and what's really cool is Morgantha can actually use this to scry in. She's doing that toil and trouble kind of thing. But what's also interesting is the fact that she can knock on the barrel 3 times, and if she does this, then a dretch will pop out. This dretch is not here forever, though. This dretch only is around for an hour, after which it dissolves. Morgantha can summon 9 of these dretches before all of the ichor is gone. We also get some pretty fun little potions here, per example being a elixir of labeled youth, and it states that it's a golden syrup that makes the imbiber younger and more attractive for a whopping 24 hours. However, it sadly wears off. There's another elixir named laughter, and what this does is it gives you cackle fever, which is not good. And a third elixir is labeled Mother's Milk, and it's pretty gross, but it's just a pale tincture. Located inside the kitchen as well, we also have a chicken coop with 3 chickens that lay a few eggs. And there's also a wooden trunk which contains hundreds of toads, because what are witches without a whole bunch of toads on their persons? In Area 2, we have the Bone Mill, and this is where the devious and devilish magic happens. Of course, this is where all the kids' bones are taken and grind into a fine powder for all of the lovely dream pastries. In Area 3, we have the bedroom, but what's creepy about this bedroom isn't its denizens, which are the night hags. No, it's the fact that these women apparently sleep right next to all of the kids that they are capturing and testing to see if they have souls. What's really sad is when your players arrive here, they'll find 2 captured children. There is Freak and Myrtle. And these 2 kids are sat here and they're getting fattened up for lovely pies. But here's the real kicker. Even if your players somehow deal with all of the hags and free these kids don't want to go back to their parents. Screw those people. Those people literally sold them out and they know it. So they don't want to go back home. So now you're in the position of what do you do with these kids? They will specifically state that they do like Ismark and Irina. So if your players bring them back to the village of Barovia, then that is certainly a great place to give them to. However, if your players are dead set on making their way to the village of Vallaki, then you can go ahead and use the orphanage that resides within the city. Located in here is a decent amount of gold. Your players can eventually find 6 pieces of cheap jewelry worth 25 gold each in the moldy straw mattresses. And lastly, Area 4, the domed attic. This is a location which your players may try and attempt to sneak into or climb all the way up. Or if they have the Fortunes of Ravenloft and they know for a fact that the windmill is one of these locations, then they will find whatever treasure that they drew is in here. So pretty simple stuff here. This chapter is literally only 4 pages long, so we don't get too much information about really what's going on here, other than just quick little notes on how to roleplay these characters and what they see when they arrive here. So I'm going to go ahead and show off several different ways you can go ahead and run this encounter and run the Coven. The first one being running it completely as written. Your players may have already interacted with Morgantha all the way back in the village of Barovia, in which case Morgantha might have already said, hey, my kids are there, if you go ahead and stop by, they'll go ahead and sell you some pies. In which case, then if your players make their way inside and start searching around the place, they're going to find out what's going on here, and they either might get freaked out and run away, or they might try to do the noble thing and fight, in which case they'll probably lose horribly. So if you're going down this route of running it more as written, then you have to consider the implications. If your players walk in and they immediately see children's bones, then lo and behold, they're gonna obviously be sus. And if they straight up ask and start searching around the place, they're immediately gonna find out what's going on here. They're gonna know that they take kids and turn them into paste and basically sell them back to people. And this will be doubly mortifying if one of your players have already eaten one of the pies. So if you have a group that's going to come down here, start kicking doors, and start killing, a whole bunch of kid killers, then you have to change this encounter to some degree. Because if the Coven is complete, all 3 women are here in this very house, then a lower level party will not be able to handle this. Not even a 5th level party, not even a 6th level party, really. They'd have to be a very high level to deal with the Coven, because individually they are strong, but more so when they are together, they are that much stronger. So if you do want to give your players a sense of justice, then you can go ahead and say that the Coven isn't here. You can go ahead and say that Morgantha and one of the kids is actually off away to either the village of Barovia or trying to get into Vallaki, trying to get some more kids. In which case only one woman is left here, and thus the Coven cannot be completed. And a lower level party could theoretically try and get the jump on only one person here. It still would be an incredibly tough fight if you ran a Night Hag to their full potential, but at least it would give them a chance. And that would also draw upon the horror of this world, that if you have a party and this party can't even deal with one person effectively, then they're going to be in for a tough time. My second recommendation for how you can run the Coven here is not have them play up their hagginess. Do not show off any of the decor that would give away the impression that they eat kids. Hide away all of the bones. Don't even allow them to go upstairs. Make your players think that this is a business and upstairs is their dwelling, and they're not going to let random people, upstairs in their dwelling, right? And if you have that notion of your players are allowed in the first floor and they can see around that this is a kitchen and it's operating more so on the up and up, then your players may not be as gung-ho to try and, kill these people. If you play this up way more in a roleplay sense than a potential combat sense, then there's a really good chance your players will buy into it. If you don't show off any of the full names of these women, if you don't show off the creepy and macabre part of the kitchen, such as the ichor and all of the toads, and of course all the bones, then this seems way more on the up and up, and it will take people a lot more investigation to discover what's really going on here. Another important way to sell this whole shtick is to show off the fact that children do reside here. If your players saw Morgantha take a kid from the village of Barovia, she can go ahead and simply say, hey, I'm just taking this kid away from these terrible parents. I'm running like a halfway home, an orphanage, and the kid's gonna come work for me for a bit. And if you have that baked into the adventure, no pun intended, that the kids are working here and they are doing menial tasks like kneading dough and, rolling stuff out and doing all that fun prep work in the kitchen, that can be an excellent way to sit there and be like, ooh, these women seem kind of sketchy, but at least they're taking these kids away from these broken homes. That seems a little bit okay-ish, and that'll make it even more mortifying if your players do find out what's going on here. If they see that these women are baking kids and they're having other kids help with the process, that's terrifying. And a third recommendation I have to going and changing this encounter is getting rid of the hags. One thing I've noticed is as soon as you show off the fact that there's 3 women that live by themselves, especially if you have the Old Bonegrinder located in the middle of nowhere, is the fact that your players are probably going to be perceptive enough to say, hey, these are hags. I don't care what you say. I don't care what I roll. I don't care whatever. I know these are hags. If you go ahead and just scrap the whole hag idea, that can lead to a lot of roleplay implications. If you go ahead and say that these are not hags, but simply 3 women that live here, then you can have a ton of fun with that. You don't have to sit there and, BS rolls. You don't have to sit here and come up with reasons why they might suspect that they are hags or whatever. No matter what they say, no matter what they do, no matter what magic they cast, no matter what they roll, they will discover that these 3 women are simply human. And what are they doing here? Well, that's once again entirely up to you. Are these women on the up and up and running a halfway home for kids that had terrible families? Or are these 3 women doing the same thing that the hags were doing and cooking up kids? I promise you that if you run this encounter with no hags and they are simply running a halfway home for kids, no baking of kids at all, you're going to subvert a lot of expectations, which can be a good thing. If you run this thing completely 180, you are going to blindside people, which can be great. There's a lot of cliches in this module. There's a lot of motifs in this module that your players are going to pick up on, which, once again, those are perfectly fine as well. But if you have a group that has dealt with hags one too many times, if they've dealt with the strange and the macabre one too many times, then going ahead and throwing in a bit of light in this campaign isn't going to be bad, I promise you. And in addition to that, you could go ahead and say that these 3 women are in fact just humans, but they are baking up kids. And that would be a terrifying revelation, because your players might go and confront them, and they might think that they're hags because, of course, 3 women baking up kids, and get into these conflicts. And as soon as they strike a single blow against any of the women, they're either going to kill them outright or knock them out. And then they'll sit there and be like, ooh, these are just humans? Like, ooh, that's terrifying. And you can really press into the fact that this land is so dark and so depressing that it is driving people to insanity, to the point where some women are going out there snatching kids up and baking them into pies and selling them back to the people. Now, whichever variation you take on this whole thing, whether the hags are just doing what they do as per written, the hags are a bit more secretive, or if they're not even hags at all, whatever the case may be, the biggest thing about this is the fact that the Bonegrinder is located out in the middle of nowhere. And that really doesn't sit well with the rest of the adventure, because your players learn that the outside world is dangerous. And your players are going to pick up on the fact that if 3 women are just going out in the middle of nowhere, out in the middle of the road by themselves, and they're not getting killed, they're probably going to start suspecting something. So one strong recommendation I would have is moving the location of the Old Bonegrinder, either making it much closer to Vallaki or much closer to the village of Barovia. One of the two, because right now it's basically located right at the midway point in between the two, and it doesn't seem very realistic that 3 older women would be carting around something and carting a whole bunch of kids around in the middle of this dangerous world. And speaking about the Old Bonegrinder here, don't let your players know that it's called the Old Bonegrinder. That name alone gives away everything. No one would know this place is called the Old Bonegrinder. In fact, I don't even think the hags would call this place the Old Bonegrinder, right? That seems way too on the nose. Maybe they say that as a joke in amongst each other, but they would, of course, never say it in front of people. So, to give this place a name, you could just simply call it the Old Mill. You could call it the Halfway Home. You could call it the Leaning Grinder. You can call it so many different things. Give it a different name. Do not allow the words Old Bonegrinder to slip from your mouth, because I know for a fact there's been a ton of DMs who accidentally said the word Old Bonegrinder aloud because they're just staring at the name and they just say it. And their players just immediately go, oh, I see. So go ahead and try and erase the Old Bonegrinder name out of your mind and replace it with something else. Calling it the Old Mill, I think, works perfectly fine. And lastly, here in this chapter, we have information on the Megaliths, which are located right behind the Old Bonegrinder. We sadly don't get any map on this, but I promise you there are maps galore on this module, and you can easily find one with just a quick Google search or searching in the Discord. So what are these Megaliths? Well, there's 4 of them, and each one depicts a different city. but each of these cities is sort of associated with a season of the year. So we have a winter one shown covered in snow, a spring one covered in flowers, a summer one covered in sunburst, and an autumn one covered in leaves. If your players ask anybody that would know about this in the lands of Barovia, they would go ahead and tell them that these are the 4 cities. These are a place of paradise, which the Morning Lord, Mother Night, and other ancient gods first dwelled. When your players arrive, they'll of course see several ravens that are flying overhead, crying aloud, and one of them will actually have a dream pastry and it's eating it above the one on the autumn megalith. What's also creepy to note is the fact that this place is desecrated by the Hags. And how did they do this? Well, they placed human teeth in the center as an offering of worship to Kathleen of the Crooked Teeth. No more information is provided at all whatsoever in this book, sadly, about the Megaliths, about the cities, about Kathleen of the Crooked Teeth. All of that you must discover on your own out there in the World Wide Web. So I'm going to go ahead and say, though, one of the best resources for all of Curse of Strahd would be Mandymod and Dragna Carta, all of which can be found on the Curse of Strahd Reddit and the Curse of Strahd Discord server. In there, the Megaliths have been touched up in more ways than one and actually given flavor and given life and actually tied to Strahd, and that is some really awesome stuff. But do the Megaliths need to be part of this adventure? If you don't want them to, not really. If you don't want the Fanes of Barovia to be impactful in this adventure, then they don't need to be. You can simply go ahead and just ignore this altogether. Or your players can go ahead and discover, creepy human teeth located right near this windmill, which once again sort of gives away what's going on here. So with that, we're already done with this chapter. Like I said, it's only 4 pages, but you can eke out a lot of great stuff here. You can definitely have a lot of fun roleplay elements with the Coven and your players, whether that be your players trying to coerce the women into giving up the kids, whether that be your players trying to pull off a caper, trying to get these kids away from the Bonegrinder. Your players could just show up as knights in shining armor and try and kill the Hags and save the kids. Simple as that. There is so many different ways you can go ahead and approach this. And like I said, there's more ways than one. You don't have to run it purely as written, because if you run it purely as written, one, you're probably going to kill some players. Just as written, the Hags are just so incredibly tough. They are ridiculous. They have 112 health, but mind you, they have resistance to non-magical damage. So a more martially inclined party is really going to see an individual with 224 health, That is basically how you would look at it. And at early levels, that's just a lot. It is way too much. The Hags are going to be able to claw their way in, no problem, and knock some people down. They're going to magic missile people down over the course of time. They can go ahead and just cast sleep, and someone's going to fall down. So I would go ahead and try and approach this as non-combative as possible. If you do not want to nerf the Hags to any degree, I would go ahead and have the Hags be like, hey, we don't want any trouble. Go away now. Kindly leave us and we won't do anything and we can all walk away happy. But if you have players that think that they can win every fight, then maybe this is one of the better opportunities to go ahead and tell them that they can't win every fight. So what happens if your players arrive here and they get the drop on one of the Hags and it removes them? The Coven is broken, thankfully. But what about their business? Well, if the mill isn't destroyed, they're probably going to keep business going as usual, even if the Coven is incomplete. So more than likely, if players wanted to stop all of the, kid grinding business, then they're going to have to destroy this place. And how are they going to go about doing that? Probably just by burning the place down to the ground. Simple as that. Of course, this is one of the first encounters your players can come across, but that doesn't mean your players can't come back here again. Maybe your players find out that there's Hags here and they get their butts kicked, or maybe they just realize that they can't handle these people and decide to come back at a later date. And once they've powered up enough and felt their confidence surge, they can go ahead and show back up here and beat the Hags. And, if they are higher levels, such as 7, 8, 9, they'll probably be able to dunk on the Hags and destroy the horrible operation that they've got going on here. In which case, they've done a tremendously good deed. No longer will kids in this land be taken away from their parents and, sold back to the peoples. But at the same time, the funny implication of that is, while yes, kids aren't getting killed anymore, a lot of Barovians actually like those dream pastries. They do, in fact, take you to a magical place for at least a small amount of time. And unfortunately, if you remove all of the pies, then they're going to be miserable all the time. Yeah, it's terrible that kids were getting eaten, but at the same time, these people are miserable. And if you are running the fact that wine is running low in the land of Barovia, then if there is no wine and there is no dream pastries, then people are going to suffer greatly. People's morale is going to be even lower than normal, and you can go ahead and show that reflection in the world. You can go ahead and show off the fact that people are not willing to go on because they have nothing to look forward to, really. So hopefully, if your players do get rid of the Old Bonegrinder, then hopefully they can go ahead and try and do something to bring back life and light into the land of Barovia. But how are they going to do that? That is entirely up to them and entirely up to what you allow. But that is going to do it for me for the Old Bonegrinder here. There is so much more to go into in the Curse of Strahd module here. There is going to be so many NPCs to go over, so many locations to dive into, and the next one coming up will be the village of Vallaki. And Vallaki is a doozy. Vallaki has a lot of strings attached with it. There's a lot of threads that your players can go down and discover a lot of the locations. They can discover a lot of peoples, and they can truly see the horror that awaits. Because sadly, in the village of Vallaki, they don't have to worry about monsters. They have to worry about men. But that is a video for a future date. I just want to go ahead and say thank you to every single one of my patrons here. Shout out to my patrons, Mike, Harmony Ginger, and Todd Gurks. And thank you all for watching. You guys are absolutely incredible, and I love diving into all these modules that I love so much. You guys really help me out in motivating me to make all of this content. So that's going to do it for me for this video. Thank you all for watching, and I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.